This is Global News on Equa Television International. Our top stories: United States President Joe Biden reaches a vital new tipping point on Ukraine. World's oldest known person, French nun, dies at 118. Brazil charges those rose over Ukraine has been rendered even more critical by a winter battlefield that was more dynamic than the anticipated frozen stalemate. Time is also fast ebbing for the U.S. and its allies to send more powerful weapons and to train Ukrainian soldiers how to use them before the second, possibly decisive year of the war, which could see Russia launch a ferocious new offensive. The aching humanitarian cost of the conflict and the justification for Western support was meanwhile laid bare by the horror of a Russian cruise missile attack on a 9-story apartment block in Dnipro in central Ukraine that killed 45 people, including 6 children. The tragedy aggravated the wickedness of an unprovoked war and renewed calls for the Putin to face war crimes charges. It also underscored that any hopes for a negotiated end to the war are more distant than ever, a fact that seems to have injected, and partners are now committing tanks and armored vehicles to Ukraine. Numerous are joining the U.S. in sending Patriot anti-missile steps that will have been off limits early in the war in order to avoid further provoking Putin EW resolve and unity into the Western alliance at a critical moment. Ukraine, given its desperate plight, will always want more, and while the West's coming choices will ultimately be based on an assessment of its own interests, the context of Ukraine's agony and courage is impossible to ignore. Andrei, French nun's sister, the world's oldest known person, died on Tuesday at the age of 118 in the southern city of Toulon. The city's mayor, Herbert Falco, announced the news of her death, saying that it is with immense sadness and emotion that I learned tonight of the passing of the world's oldest person, #Sister Andrei. The nun spokesman, David Tavella, said she died on Tuesday at 2 a.m. local time and lived near Toulon. There is great sadness, but she wanted it to happen. It was her desire to join her beloved brother. For her, it is freedom, he said. Born at Lusail, Randon on February 11, 1904, Sister Andrei dedicated most of her life to religious service, according to a statement released by Guinness in April 2022. Before becoming a Catholic nun, she looked after children during World War II and then spent 28 years in elderly people at a hospital. She was also the oldest nun to ever live, according to Guinness. When she turned 118 in 2022. The nun received a handwritten proceeding over the Catholic Church since she was born. She became the world's eldest following the death of King Tanaka, a Japanese woman earlier certified as the world's oldest person who died at the age of 100 lives. Now, Brazil's prosecutor general has presented in the October election, which formed Jair Bolsonaro requested that the 39 defendants accused of raiding Congress be frozen to aid cover damages. The defendants have been charged with armed criminal association, violent attempt to undermine the democratic state of law, staging a coup, and sabotage to public property, the Prosecutor General's office said in a written statement. Their identities have not yet been released. Over 1,000 people were arrested on the day of the January 8th riot, which bore strong similarities to the January 6, 2021 riots at the U.S. Congress by mobs who wanted to overturn the presidential palace and the Supreme Court in the capital, Brasilia, sought to have the armed forces intervene and overturn Bolsonaro's laws to President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The rioters attempted with the use of violence and serious threat to eliminate the democratic rule of law, preventing or restricting the exercise of constitutional powers, according to an excerpt of charges included in a statement. The attackers were not charged with terrorism because under Brazilian law, such a charge must involve xenophobia or prejudice based on race, ethnicity, or religion. The Prosecutor General's office sent its charges to the Supreme Court after the Senate's President, Rodrigo Pacheco, last week provided a list of people accused of storming through Congress. Additional rioters are expected to be charged. Tokyo's High Court has upheld a not guilty verdict for 3 former executives from the operator of the Fukushima nuclear power plant, again clearing them of professional negligence over the 2011 nuclear disaster. On Wednesday, the decision was announced by activists supporting the prosecution of the three former Tokyo Electric Power Company TEPCO executives after the appeal hearing at the Tokyo High Court, which ruled to uphold a not guilty verdict by a lower court. In the only criminal proceedings to arise out of the world's worst nuclear crisis since Chernobyl in 1986, former TEPCO chairman Tsunehisa Kutsumata, 82, and one-time executive Sekimoto, 72, and Akiro Takekuro, 76, were all found not guilty of negligence by the Tokyo District Court in 2019. The High Court refused to comment on its verdict while the session was still ongoing on Wednesday. According to reports, the ruling cleared the defendants of professional negligence resulting in deaths and injuries. The TEPCO-operated Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plants went into meltdown in 2011, and explosions sent radiation into the atmosphere after a magnitude 9.0 overwhelmed the plant. The tsunami left 18,500 people dead or missing, but no one was recorded as having been directly killed by the nuclear accident, which forced evacuations and left parts of the surrounding area uninhabitable. 5-year jail terms have been sought for the three former TEPCO officials on charges of negligence resulting in the deaths of 44 people, including hospitalized patients in Fukushima region who had to be hastily evacuated following the nuclear disaster. At their criminal trial, which concluded in 2019, a nuclear power plant located on the coast of Japan, a country prone to earthquakes and tsunamis. Prosecutors argued that the executives were aware of the dangers and cited TEPCO's knowledge of assessments that a large-scale tsunami was thus not liable. The three-member group has urged Sri Lanka to release a prominent student activist who was arrested on the protest, arresting many in July. Many of those arrested have been released on bail, but the rights group say authorities have islands asked Japan to delay release nuclear power plants over fears it could pollute fishing. Fukushima plants, which was destroyed in an earthquake and a tsunami in 2011, could be released, hindering its decommissioning and in danger of leaking in the event of a major earthquake or tsunami. The Pacific Island Forum, PIF, a regional bloc of 17 island nations, many of whom are still battling with the legacy of nuclear testing decades ago, say the release of the water could have a significant effect on fishing grounds that their economies rely on and where up to half of the world's tuna is sourced. The United States conducted nuclear testing in the Pacific Islands in the 1940s and 1950s. The Marshall Islands continues to campaign for more compensation from Washington over lasting health and environmental effects. France conducted atomic testing between 1966 and 1996 at Mururoa Atoll in French Pacific territories. A scientist with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, Ken Buswela, told the forum on Wednesday that a PIF scientific professional panel was urging Japan to reconsider the waste release because it was not supported by data and more information was needed. Radioactive moves across the ocean with currents and tides and risk contaminating fish, he said. Japan's regional neighbors, including China and South Korea, and groups such as Greenpeace have also criticized the plan. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, has said the release meets international standards and will not cause any harm to the environment. On weather and climate, California residents grapple to recover after weeks of storms. Ashley Harper had hoped to bring in the new year surrounded by friends and family at her home in the Northern California town of Soquel along the United States West Coast. But as consecutive storms covered the state in heavy rainfall, Harper stated her worry the normally peaceful creek next to her house had started to swell. She's one of the millions of residents in California who continue to battle with the effects of a historic storm system that dropped record amounts of rain in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now, after 3 straight weeks of thin, intense storms known as atmospheric rivers, cleanup efforts across the state have started. Heavy winds and torrential rains have left roads buckled and power lines downed. Many areas remain vulnerable to floods and landslides. Experts warn the storms could ultimately cost the state billions in damages. U.S. President Joe Biden plans to visit the state on Thursday after issuing an emergency declaration last week. About 150 kilometers, 93 miles north of Los Angeles, the coastal city of Santa Barbara of Santa Barbara, received nearly 90% of its yearly rainfall average in less than 2 weeks, with thousands of people evacuated due to the risk of landslides and neighborhoods flooded with waist-deep waters. While the weather is likely to moderate, county officials are urging residents to continue exercising caution. And lastly, on global news, in Africa, on business and economy, will Egypt slow mega projects down as economic crisis deepens? The Egyptian economy is struggling. The national currency has lost closely half its value in less than a year, reaching Egyptian pounds to the dollar last week before bouncing back slightly. Several imported products are not available anymore, and basic foods such as eggs and cooking oil have doubled in price. No wonder the pound's collapse and rising prices are the talk of the day in Egypt. Attempts to lessen the situation have exacerbated, at least temporarily, the problem. Egypt's government last week agreed to move to a flexible exchange rate, privatize state-owned enterprises, and slow down public investment in national projects, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) announced. The float of the pound in specific is a significant condition for the $3 billion loan deal Egypt agreed with the IMF last month in order to solve an economic crisis and foreign currency shortage. President El-Sisi has put the blame for the economy's difficulties on the Ukraine war. In the weeks after the war broke out, foreign investors sold off Egyptian treasury bills, resulting in an estimated $20 billion flowing out of the country. In order to keep dollars in, Egypt imposed importing restrictions, which in turn harmed the heavily import-reliant local industry. Banks also put official restrictions on foreign currency withdrawals and payments. But analysts argue that the Ukraine war only exposed pre-existing structural problems in the Egyptian economy and showed that the economic model was unsustainable. Berlin-based analyst and writer Mahmoud Salem believes the Central Bank of Egypt, CBE, pegging the exchange rate, keeping the value of the pound artificially high, has been at the root of the problem. It will be Zoom on Nigeria after this break. Stay with us.